Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, May the 15th, 2023. We only have one item for consideration this evening, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn. It involves economic development update.
As promised last week, we'd kind of like to get the council up to speed on some things that are going on. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Gress to start his wanderings.
Thank you, sir. We were talking last week and just realized with all the distractions and everything else going on over the last couple of months, there has been a lot of exciting things in the works. So I'm excited to update the council on everything that has been going on kind of behind the scenes and some things moving forward here. So as many of you may know, we did fill the position for the ED director. Jordan Lee will start on Monday, the 22nd. And she should be here on Monday night for a couple of business items to introduce her to you all. So looking forward to having her. She has an interesting background, kind of a mix of economic development and communications. So we're looking forward to having somebody in our department specifically that has some of those skills that can fill some of the voids that other employees didn't necessarily have in our department. So really looking forward to having her on board. But felt this was a good opportunity to give kind of the state of economic development before she takes over and gets us the Olive Garden that we're waiting for. So in general, just some general department administration things. Like I said, next week I'll spend the next 2 weeks bringing her up to speed on all of the projects and kind of introducing her to folks around the community, although she's, I think, mostly familiar with the Belton Raymore area for the most part. As I said, with her background in communication, as the council knows, we have had a couple businesses that have closed in the last couple of months, and so I wanted to work with her and maybe hone in on the communication side of her skills and start introducing her to businesses and having those conversations just to see in general how things are going. And then also we'll get her transitioned onto the Chamber of Commerce board. As the council knows, the city has 2 seats on the chamber board. Myself, I sit on the events and the government affairs committees, and so we'll slowly transition her into those roles with both the mayor and I to get her up to speed with the chamber. So really looking forward to that. And then lastly, again, with the marketing background, when I started in the ED position in 2019, we redid some of the marketing materials and kind of flyers for the city. A lot of that information is still relevant, but I think now would be a good time to take a new look at that and make sure some of the data is up to date with the census information that's been released over the last year or so. And so those are kind of the 4 prongs that we'll focus on once she starts on Monday. But really excited to have that position filled again and have a full department on our end. So then I wanted to touch on projects that have been under construction, some of which haven't really been announced, but I can share a couple things that wouldn't have made it to this kind of phase. But overall, so Elite Fence and Deck, as many of you have probably seen over on the east side of town, right off of 58 Highway. Kevin Lint, the owner of that business, decided here a few months ago to move his headquarters from Lee Summit and grow his business into a larger facility here. So we're excited to see him. He's done a lot of work refacing that old building on 58 Highway, kind of adding some new color and taking off some of the older architectural features of that building. Added a new building in the back that will be kind of material storage. So it'll just be a really nice new use for that building in light of just tearing it down. So we're really glad that somebody else purchased it and is breathing some new life into it. I think they're scheduling not necessarily a ribbon cutting because they'll be done here pretty shortly, but they are going to plan like a family friends day, I think, in June or July. So stay tuned from the chamber. We'll share some information about that to meet that family. Again, as you all know, Starbucks Coffee is well under construction. They're on 58 next to Culver's. They are targeting September timeframe to be operational. They're in time for the fall. And so they have been moving full steam ahead. I think finally the Evergy truck was there this morning. They've been waiting for permanent power to that building was kind of the delay that they ran into. So excited to see that project move on and fill up kind of the undeveloped green space there in that property. Southern Glazers, this was announced to the council back in 2020, but with the material delays and just the amount of work that company is putting into that building, they are still under construction, building out the tenant space more or less. So with all of their racking and conveyor systems and all the different details that go into that facility, they were projecting to be operational by mid-2024 is their new estimate. I know they've already done, I think, some partnerships with the police department with some fundraising, things like that. And so really looking forward to that building being fully operational as well. And then lastly, in the Commerce Center, as the council knows, Newly, which is moving forward, they have submitted, I think, their second of 4 plan submittals for the work that they have to do in that building. And they are still on target to be fully operational by the end of this year. They had actually pre-purchased a lot of equipment in anticipation of purchasing or leasing a building. So a lot of their work was actually done on the front end, which helps them stay on time or stay on target. And so what you see in the building there is actually kind of what their plans are for at least one of the panels on the outside of their building, to just get kind of creative with the huge facade that those buildings present. And so again, really excited to work with them. They've been a good community partner with us ever since we started chatting with them in 2020. So very excited to see them get that building up and operational. Yes, they are planning right now between 10 and 15,000 square feet of a retail center. So they kind of have I guess a twofold approach to their business. They rent out their apparel through their kind of online platform, and you can either keep the apparel that you rent or you can send it back, and they kind of reuse those garments as much as they can until they aren't so new anymore. When they get to that point, they put them in what they call Newly Thrift, which is kind of their consignment center. So that's their plan for, I believe it is going to be in the northeast corner of that building, kind of the space you see as you drive down Dean Avenue. But they were planning on about 10 to 15,000 square feet to fill that space here at some point. Correct. I don't know that that'll be operational from day one. They'll obviously have to go through some of their inventory to build that up, but that was one of the things that they definitely were planning to put in that facility. Last but not least, before I get on the other two, I did want to share, there's been some other businesses that have joined the city that just filled existing spaces that didn't really make it to the commission or to city council. Last week we did a ribbon cutting for the Painted Posy, which is a small kind of fashion boutique that took up the old law office that's right next to the dispensary there at the Source. It was the old house building that had the quilt shop in it at one time. So they moved here from Peculiar. They couldn't find a space that was large enough to house all of their different vendors that they have. So they did a really nice job fixing up the basement of that building. So if you're looking for any gifts or anything, stop by because it's a really unique space. The mayor and I were just there last week for their ribbon cutting. Many of you may know Mary Kay Mitchell. She was a dentist here in Raymore for, I think she said 25 years, and decided here recently to retire. She's located right there across from Harmon Tire, kind of on the S-curve. So instead of closing her business there, she owns the building that she was in, but instead of closing her practice, she hired somebody to kind of come up beneath her and take over her practice for her. So we had a ribbon cutting for her, I think, 2 weeks ago. So we're excited to see that somebody's still in that building and continuing on here in the community. And then lastly, about 2 weeks ago, we had a ribbon cutting for Artisan Branding Company, which is another kind of boutique woodworking shop over on the east side of town. It's right there next to 58 and Prairie Lane. It used to be Small Engine Specialist, kind of a repair facility. But they've lived here in Raymore for quite some time and do a lot of kind of neat custom woodworking for engraving, laser etching, and things like that. So if you're looking for plaques or trophies or anything cool, give them a call and stop by there because they did have some really interesting things going on inside that building as well. And then lastly, from the residential side, there are a couple of projects that are kind of wrapping up here. The Oak Ridge Farms community there, which is right behind the post office. I think by this time this week, they are totally done with the first 3 phases of that subdivision, which is the duplex development and then the villas that they have in there as well. So they are 100% occupied or at least leased as they're finishing up the finishing touches on the last units that they have available. And then they just put in the streets and the curbs and will probably start foundation construction for their townhome portion of that community there further to 58 within the next couple of weeks. They finished up their infrastructure here recently and will be moving forward with that phase in the coming weeks. So exciting to see that project leased up and done. They've been working in that neighborhood for quite a while now. So it's good to see them moving on to the next project. And then lastly, there at the venue at North Cass and Dean, the northern portion of that site for the most part is all, I would say, I don't know the percentage that it's leased, but there are a handful of folks living and moving into that neighborhood right now. I'd say on the north half, they still have probably 50% of the units that are in their final inspection phase. They're not necessarily occupiable, but they're done for the most part. So You'll probably start to see some additional signage go around there and go up, and I think they're moving towards getting the second half of their project accepted by the city council for their infrastructure so they can continue leasing on the south side. But they have seen some good interest. They indicated to the city to keep that project going forward and getting people moving into the community. So before I get into other projects, are there any other questions about existing ongoing projects? I can proceed forward.
Not I guess more a comment on the Oak Ridge. I appreciate that they actually, you can see that big tree in the middle of all the street work and everything, so I appreciate that they did try to save at least a tree.
Yeah, I know they did as much as they could. As part of their approvals, we required them to preserve the ones on Pine Street, so they did a good job putting the sidewalk in and preserving that. And just like they did in the first phase, they usually kind of go overboard with their landscaping, so we'll look forward to seeing that project get finished up here. What was the name of the boutique or whatever near dispensary? It's the Painted Posy. Their address, I think there's two addresses there. It's 1909 West Foxwood Drive, if you're curious. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, as we've started on this, doing these multifamily, you know, we've got now some experience in that, and we've got more going in. Just interesting to find out what are the owners, the managers of those places. How is the lease rate, rental rate? How are they looking at Raymore right now? Yeah,
it's a good question. So the only one that's completely finished would be the lofts at Fox Ridge, at least of ones that have done the Chapter 100. The last time I talked with them, which was about 2 months ago, they were what they consider stabilized in their leasing, which means they're between 90 and 95% occupied. There's always a handful of units that are available in there. But they have had good interest, and their lease rates from what they projected to the city council when they got their approvals actually is, I mean, that's believable now because everything's expensive, but their lease rates are quite a bit higher than what they were initially expecting to get for those units. So they have had some good interest. They've reached out to the city a couple of times to, they're looking for a space to add kind of an outdoor pavilion for their residents and some other outdoor amenities in that to kind of add to it. But for the most part, I think people are generally happy with that community. I don't know like the turnover rate in terms of how long people have stayed yet. I don't know that it's been long enough to see that, but they were very happy with their occupancy rates the last time her and I spoke.
Anyone else? Okay.
All right. So now I just wanted to touch on just ongoing projects or kind of things that are in the pipeline that you all might see here in the future. So the first I wanted to start with Raymore Commerce Center Phase 1, which is everything that's under construction so far. There's a little over 2 million square feet completed to date between the three buildings. Obviously Southern Glazers took the entirety of Building 1 early on in that project, and then Urban Outfitters and Newly is proceeding forward with the tenant finish for their building. Overall, that accounts for about 60% of the overall development. Right now, we're actually going to meet on this Wednesday with a tenant who is signing a lease. It's a local medical equipment manufacturing and assembly and distribution company who is combining two facilities in the greater Cass County, Jackson County area and consolidating them into an opportunity here for growth. So I can't share who that is quite yet, but we are meeting at their facility on Wednesday to take a look so that the building official and fire marshal can see plan-wise what they're going to need for them to move forward. But they have all but signed the lease on that facility, so they're going to be moving forward, and we'll look forward to sharing that with you all here in the future. So that would be 150,000 square feet of Building 2, which is in the middle. And then there's another company that is already existing in the metro area, but they're looking for a newer space to grow. And they're looking at 205,000 square feet, which would be kind of south of the other space I just told you about, and would occupy about half, a little over half, I think, of Building 2, which is good. So all in all, if both of those projects move forward, Raymore Commerce Center Phase 1 will be about 75% occupied, with 400 or so thousand square feet in Building 3, and then the remaining square footage in Building 2. So there has been some interest. Project activity, I guess, from the regional level has been a little bit slow this year, with a little bit more interest in smaller buildings than what we have. Both of these two projects I just mentioned were both generated by Van Trust and their broker to get interest there. So really looking forward to seeing their feedback and hopefully those projects moving forward within that development. Raymore Commerce South, which is the project the council approved here late last year. They obviously have all of their zoning approvals in place, but have not moved forward with any site development. They were waiting for a little bit more stabilization on their first phase before they did any huge investment on the south. The site work and the grading for the Dean Avenue extension is gearing up to get started, and I've got more to talk about down there in a second. But that would be the extension from their south building around the lift station down to connect into 195th Street. They will start that work ahead of any substantial site work on the site itself or any vertical construction to get access to that road. I think as we reported on to the council here a few months ago, Mr. Keller, when he was here, worked to submit an application through the state of Missouri, through the governor's cost share program, and the city received just over $4 million to support that Dean Avenue extension project with Van Trust. And so that was part of the agreement that came forward with you all for their Chapter 100 was the receipt of that grant. We received the final funding agreement or the draft funding agreement from MoDOT on Friday, and so staff is reviewing that and will likely bring that forward to the council in the next couple of weeks. But that allows the Dean Avenue signal that was funded by the council to move forward, and then allows Van Trust to start some more substantial work on the road. So really excited to see that project move forward. Really grateful with Mr. Keller's efforts of securing that grant, because it was no small effort between him and Van Trust. So again, the council will see that here shortly in terms of that funding agreement to be able to move forward.
Okay. Don?
Do you anticipate the traffic signal being in place prior to any of those businesses starting, like, by the end of the year?
That's what we are shooting for, yes. We more or less, that was a big deal for Newly when they moved in because of their, they're going to operate multiple shifts. So that was a big deal for them. It's not contingent on them moving into the building or anything, but it was a kind of a big plus that it would be operational pretty soon. I wish Mr. Krass was here, because I don't know the lead time to get the equipment for that signal, but you will see it here pretty quickly with that funding agreement to get that contract awarded, I think.
I actually, because it's not our money, I actually gave Mr. Kraft the go-ahead about a month ago to do all the pre-orders that he could on that particular unit. So those are already in place.
David, do you have any numbers on jobs that are going to be brought to the 75% fill that you were talking about with the tenants that we have on board already and those that could potentially come?
Yeah. So Southern Glazers will have between 300 and 350 jobs. Their kind of activity is dependent on, they have an existing facility up by the airport, I believe. So they've been trying to figure out how many of those employees will move down here versus how many they're going to have to hire to replace them. But they were projecting between 300 and 350. And then Newly was projecting about 750 jobs to be added here as well. So I would say that's right on par with what we estimated when this project started. Mm-hmm. Newly is a very textile-heavy operation with a lot of the stitching and sewing and cleaning that they do with their products, so they have a pretty high employee count. Whereas with Southern Glazers, they're more distribution, so some of that is automated, but obviously you have to have people in there to operate that equipment as well. I know the equipment manufacturing that I told you about on the building 2, they are a little bit smaller of a operation, I believe, so I don't know the job numbers on that one quite yet, nor the other project in the building 2.
Okay.
But I would say we're pretty close to on par with the numbers that we had talked about when the council approved that project many years ago.
Okay, thanks.
So moving on, the depot, which is the project there south of Sam's Club, the council toured their North Kansas City facility here a year and a half ago or more before they came to the city. So that's approximately 300 units that are all under construction at this point. They have vertical construction on all of the buildings within that development. And I forgot to add in there, obviously in bullet 2. Building 1 and the clubhouse and the fitness center are all kind of at the interior, not quite finished stage, but they're doing a lot of the interior work. They've concluded a lot of the exterior work with the exception of some of the stone veneer that they'll add on towards the end. When I talked to them last week, they're expecting pre-leasing for those units in September, October of this year, with the first building or 2 ready by the end of this year. And then they're estimating full completion of that by about a year from now in July. for them to be totally wrapped up and done with that project. I did kind of bring the topic up with them. I think a good project for Ms. Lee to take on within the next couple of months would be planning. Well, I think once or twice since I've been here, the council's been on a tour of recently completed projects. So I think this one, since we looked at the one that was up north, I think it would be good to get the council in there and any other members of the city that would be interested in taking a look. But that's something I was going to work with her on a few months after she got started and kind of got her feet on the ground. But that project overall, this is an aerial photograph that they shared with us of the progress. And so you can see the clubhouse and fitness center is right around here, and then you move into buildings 1 and 2, which are the furthest along. They've done a lot of mass grading and excavation and kind of fixing the pond issue that we talked about. There's still some kind of weeds and overgrowth in the bottom they haven't quite got to yet, but they'll move on to landscaping that and getting it kind of cleaned up towards the end of the project. But you can kind of see they've just kind of wrapped their way around the site to keep their trades moving through it. Overall, I know contractor-wise, since Thompson Thrift is their own contractor, they've been very good to work with from the building inspection side. Sometimes projects this large can be very difficult to work with on the front end as the trades learn the intricacies of the buildings. But since they've built these types of buildings many times, they've been very good to work with from the building inspection side. So really looking forward to seeing this project come together.
Slide real quick. It's just from memory, the tree line to the left of that photo, that's where the parking lot's going to be?
The parking lot will be actually right here, kind of where my cursor is. You'll pull in, this driveway will stay, it'll be paved and asphalted. You'll pull in off of Dean Avenue and kind of turn around and hook around this way. And right around here is where the parking lot will be.
So the tree line areas, was that the land that was dedicated by Timber Trails, I believe, many years ago?
So that land area, this is Johnston Drive. So the park area that the city will get here at some point is actually this.
On that side? Okay.
This right here is still owned by Hunt Midwest. It currently has approval for, I think, 52 single-family lots. Yes, but it is still for sale.
Across the street? Okay.
Correct.
And do you know what the basin, was that supposed to be just a water basin that evaporates, or was it going to be a standing pond feature? Did they?
That's correct. As part of their Chapter 100, the council may recall, we required them to study the pond to see if it could hold water as a water feature. There's a lot of rock in this site, and therefore it cannot hold water without a very substantial investment. So instead, what they'll do is landscape it as more of a dry detention basin and plant some trees around it and some grass. So it will look leaps and bounds better than it did when they purchased this site. So another exciting project, and again, I can't share too much because they haven't filed any applications quite yet with the city, but to orient you, this is the southwest corner of 58 and Sunset, right next to the gas station. So currently owned by the owners of the gas station at this point, but there is a contract on this small lot for about a 2,000 square foot quick serve drive-through. It is a new to market concept. They don't have any of these in the Kansas City or Missouri area at all. I kind of compare it to, it's very similar to a Sonic, but without the food. They make a lot of different mixed drinks, not anything alcoholic, but different teas and different like smoothie type things. So they are working on some due diligence right now, but will be working their way through their planning and zoning approvals here with the city. A couple of things that we're working on development-wise is right now on this site, there's an access road right here, kind of midpoint, that's not very good. There's some grade issues with it, and it kind of cuts in right at the beginning point of that turn lane. And so we've actually worked with both the owner of the gas station, this lot, and the lots to the south. So what they, I think, are going to be proposing is an access drive that aligns with Conway that then provides better access over to Municipal Circle. We've been trying to work very hard to limit any additional traffic or mitigate any impacts for additional traffic at Sunset 58. And so as part of their submittals, that's what they're kind of required to look at. But it is a kind of a neat, modern looking building. And like I said, a new concept that is not anywhere in the metro area yet. So really excited that they chose this site, again, a little bit further east than what you would typically see.
Is that advanced far enough? There will or will not be a fireworks tent there?
There will not be a fireworks tent there this year, I believe. I have not seen any applications for that one yet.
Okay.
So overall, just in general at the Good Ranch, there's been some things that we have been working on. The number one complaint that we have heard from developers when talking about any of the sites around here is just there's not enough traffic, not enough people have a reason to use North Cass Parkway to get off there at I-49, and so they go through the hassles of going through 58 and going through traffic. So there's always been this big deal that there's not enough traffic on that road, and so development's kind of slow to generate any interest. But with the completion of Van Trust development, the Raymore Commerce Center, and obviously more traffic to come, but also just more traffic here once the venue gets filled up, there has been building interest down there, to say, and we've been working with a potential destination C-store is, I guess, the best way I can put it. It is not a Buc-ee's, but I can tell you that it is comparable and, in our opinion, better than a Buc-ee's. There is only one other one in the entire state of Missouri that they have built. But a few months before Mr. Keller left, he drove to St. Louis, where this company is based, and took a tour of their facility. They really liked this location because of the visibility, and were really impressed with the lake traffic heading south over holidays. They initially were looking at the southern portion of this, but now have expressed some level of interest to kind of this corner of the north side of the property as well. So that's what they're working on with their engineers. I can say it will probably be another 2 years or more before they actually propose anything. They were evaluating a couple different land sites in the Kansas City area, but this one has kind of risen to the top 2, is what we were told. So very exciting thing. They were actually really interested in the amount of daytime traffic and population within the Commerce Center, because those people have to have somewhere to eat lunch and go gas up their vehicles and whatnot. But overall, just with the projects going on, there has been more interest than what I saw when I first started here, which is good, as things continue to get built out. Moving back up to 58 at the Gateway, we continue to look at this property for a redevelopment opportunity. I think we've shared a lot of information about this site and project in the past. Many of you probably know who exactly I'm kind of veiling talking about here, but there is interest back in this property from the user that we've talked about in the past. And so staff right now is trying to look at how we use that particular tenant as an anchor tenant. Before, you may have seen some kind of concept plans for this overall site, which had some proposed big box stores kind of in the back corner. As you all probably know, we're not getting a lot of big box stores opening anymore. So that concept has kind of gone away. And now these kind of high turnover restaurants are what become the anchor tenants for developments. And so the city in particular is looking at how we can look at this entire site for a redevelopment. And then this one particular user is looking at kind of the parking lot of this property that is not highly utilized. And so they have come back. We had a couple good conversations here over the last couple of months, and they are just trying to find a solution that allows them to make that parking lot available, more or less. The current tenant there has a lease on the entire property, and there are some requirements that they have to meet in order to make that attractive for the owner and the tenant. So this would be something I would expect in the next 2 to 3 months, perhaps a work session or similar discussion with the council about what tools we might be able to use to finally get that project going.
Thank you. And those discussions are between the owner and the tenant regarding the lease terms and such?
That is correct. Yeah, the tenant has an agreement with the ownership of the building.
Ownership of the building, okay.
What they've asked the city for help with is, obviously that's kind of a unique challenge for the property, and that the parking lot isn't highly utilized but could be. So what they've asked is for some help from the city, if there are any tools available to help offset that cost that you wouldn't necessarily have on other sites that they're interested in.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
It is pretty good.
So moving back further to the east, this was a project obviously the council was familiar with in a work session, which was the Grove, about a 40-acre mixed-use master plan development that the development group proposed to you all here just a couple of months ago. They are still very much interested in the project. What they've been trying to address is it's a lot of land to purchase at once. There were initially some concerns about the phasing of the project and how quickly maybe some of the multifamily would get built ahead of the retail. I think we addressed a lot of that from the city's side with the phasing plan and so forth. What they ran into was the agreements they were trying to get in place with the ownership of the land about when and how much they would acquire of the property at a certain time, basically a phased acquisition. The ownership group wasn't necessarily interested in selling chunks of the land off at once. So that's what kind of has caused that project to stall. But when we caught up with the retail developer about 2 weeks ago, there still is good retail interest in the property. So they haven't abandoned the project by any means, but they're working to try and get the entire property back under some sort of phased contract so that they can move forward with the retail and at some point in the future come back with an application for the residential on the south half of the property. I think as they kind of discussed the other issue with that property is there are very little utilities in the ground, with the exception of the sewer that the city put in there along this creek. There really is no utilities in the property, which is a huge development expense for them as well. So that was the nature of the CID and kind of the Chapter 100 they proposed to you all at one point. So would definitely expect this project to come back here in the future if they can get some sort of agreement in place to purchase the land on a kind of a longer schedule. And then what the council will see here in a week or two would be the final agreement for the Timber Trails mixed use, which is right there off of Johnston, south of Walmart. We are working on some of the final terms of their MOU agreement before we send that to council for their second reading. Just working to address some of the access concerns that the developer had voiced during their preliminary step in the process. And what I put up here is actually a project that the council funded from a design perspective this year. And so this is kind of what we're trying to work on with them, is that there are already some of these issues that we're trying to address on Dean Avenue. And so we want to be a little cautious on how we add more access points to that corridor. And so hopefully we can get to a point that we've addressed that. And I know this overall getting this plan designed is something that Mike and I have talked about kind of off and on this year as well. In addition, what you'll see coming forward, either in tandem with their second reading of their zoning or maybe offset by a couple of weeks, would be their final Chapter 100 agreement. And so what we're reviewing right now are the terms of that agreement in terms of the percentage of retail space that has to be sales tax generating. We talked a lot about the types of hotel brands that we would find acceptable within that, and some different phasing requirements that we've talked about with the different uses. So a lot of that will be included in the Chapter 100 performance agreement, which we expect to come forward to you all in June. But there's a good chance it could get pushed back just to meet some of the notice deadlines that we have to keep in mind for that project. But they did have pretty good support from you all and the Planning and Zoning Commission for the use of the property, so hoping to see that one move forward as well.
I don't know where you're at in your conversations with the conceptual design of the traffic plan, but Walmart is currently resurfacing their parking lot right now with that, so that may create a longer conversation now because they spent money to do that. So I don't know if I just put that out there.
Mr. Lovelace and I had a very pointed conversation about his access and whether it would be a public drive or a private drive. I think he understands my position very clearly at this point in time, sir.
And on the, you're correct on the discussion with Walmart. That has been a very long, tiring process to get in touch with them and get their attention. Fortunately for them, what they're also doing with the resurfacing of their parking lot is getting rid of a lot of the concrete islands. They're going to more of a painted islands just from a maintenance standpoint. So our initial discussions with them was, here's our concept. We'd like your feedback on how your parking lot can best accommodate it and what the city can help you with. They've expressed interest in the project, but not to the point that they've really given us any hard feedback on what changes they would like to see. And so then I want to touch on a couple of different opportunities for buildings here. As the council knows, the Office Max closed here just a few months ago. So that building has been empty for a handful of months now. Unfortunately, it's about 20,000 square feet. It is finally under contract. There is a group that was leasing the building for the last couple of months while they went through some I guess, mechanical issues with the overall Raymore Galleria and some of the agreements that were in place for the look of this building, more or less. But it is a kind of a full-service orthopedic and physical therapy suite of offices. They built a new facility here in Lee Summit, I would say about a year or so ago. But they're now looking at the Office Max building for basically a reuse to recreate that project in this area. So what you see here is their conceptual plan for what they don't have a lot of grand plans for the facade of the building because renovating the interior of that is quite costly. But what they intend to do here with the front of the building is repaint it and reface it a little bit to just make it a little bit more new. And then what they have this entire portion of the building already leased for their project, more or less. But they're also going to poke a hole in the building and make this kind of a retail entrance that they're marketing right now for any general retail use. It's about 5,000 square feet that'll be left over. There's a high likelihood that will be some sort of related medical use, if you want my opinion, but it could be just with the other things going on in that facility, could be a potentially good retail space for about 5,000 square feet. And so they will be filing, I think, their tenant finish plans within the next month. They have finally exercised the option to purchase the building from the owner, Block and Company. So that'll be, you'll probably start seeing some activity on that building here within the future, or near future. And then secondly would be the previous closing of Schlotzsky's. The issue that this company had with their facility was simply a staffing issue. When they talked to Mr. Keller and I, they try to run a very well-staffed shift from a customer service standpoint. And so for a while, they just couldn't find the employees that they needed. They were pulling employees from their Lee Summit and a couple other locations in the metro area that just got to be a kind of a logistical nightmare for them. And so they still do own the building. They invested a lot of money in fixing that building up when they came to the city. So it has received very good interest because it's one of the only available buildings in this area with a drive-through. So I do believe there is a contract that is in the works with this building, but they haven't confirmed that yet. But there were two quick-serve sit-down restaurants that were going back and forth about it. The only downside with this building that they voiced is the access. It is kind of quirky to get in there. So I know they've kind of talked to the retail building where Nose is at and asked about maybe trying to connect their driveway into that to make it a little bit better. And then obviously the modifications we just talked about with Walmart would improve that a little bit as well with another signalized intersection getting in there. So we hope to find a new use for this building because, like I said, they did a really good job, invested a lot of resources in fixing it up and making it as nice as it is. So to close out, just a couple of future projects. As the council knows right now, which I hope to report on in 2 weeks or so, would be a contract to take our comp plan to the finish line. We have engaged with a consultant to take everything that staff has done and put it all together in a plan that looks nice and pretty and not like a Microsoft Word document like we have it right now. But within that is kind of the concept of activity centers for some of the larger undeveloped pieces of land. And one of the main one, although this one is developed, is the Central 58 Highway Corridor, which we presented to the council a couple years ago about maybe a Chapter 353 redevelopment strategy, and then elected to get the comp plan finished and then use that as the momentum moving forward for kind of an area plan. So that is the intention here. After we get the comp plan adopted here in the next couple of months would be to then reposition that attention to this for some sort of redevelopment strategy. As I mentioned with Elite Fence and Deck, Dave's Bike Shop did a lot of improvements. There's a lot of interest in that corridor right now. And so trying to get a redevelopment plan with some design guidelines or maybe some tax incentives or some sort of incentives to spur that development is something that there was some interest in. I think at one point with the Justice Center going in here, at least being planned for, that's a focal point of that corridor as well. And so the next step would be to take all those things and kind of put them together into some sort of planning document to keep that project going forward. The other item would be just more of an administration thing, would be a review of our economic development policy. We've moved away from a lot of the traditional tools like TIF financing and CIDs and things like that. I mean, Chapter 100s are addressed within the plan, but I don't think to the extent of how we've started using them. So I think establishing some clear metrics about when and how and where we would use those would be something to work with Jordan on here in Gilmore and Bell, and perhaps bring that back in the future for some feedback from the council as well. Not that that document is really outdated, it still is very usable, but there are other tools out there that we've kind of talked about that aren't really included in that policy. And then lastly, would be kind of something like tonight, would just like an annual review on projects that have happened in the department. A lot of what happens there is kind of confidential for a lot of the time until the project comes forward. But a lot of those projects have a lot of financial investment into the community, a lot of job investment into the community. And so being able to share that at the end of each year is something that I know me and Brandon always wanted to do, but don't really have the communication or design expertise to do it. So another thing I look forward to working with Jordan on when she starts here is a plan for that, some sort of annual report to just keep the community in the know. That really concludes my presentation, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great report, David. Anybody have any additional questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Woolman.
Thank you, sir. A couple of things. So I go back in time, 5 years, we've heard in the community survey for years, people want more sit-down restaurants. And there's a number of challenges with that. One, obviously, was the economy and the state of the industry within itself. And you even joked about Olive Garden earlier and the older brands and that kind of thing. One of our challenges on that was we don't have much of a lunch crowd because we don't have any major employers close by and that kind of thing. And that's starting to change a little bit, certainly, so we're going to see some uptick in that. But there is a new dynamic there that either we'll recognize or an individual will recognize, and that's that after hours, that's that overnight dining, if you will. It's mostly fast food, but having worked second shift up until October of last year, I can tell you at midnight, the McDonald's in Belton has a line around that building that's almost out to the highway, and they're one of the few restaurants that's open. I was surprised the other day to learn that Whataburger's open 24 hours, and I asked the on-duty manager, I said, what's your business like? His eyes real slow. I said, it's because they don't know you're here. I said, if they knew you were here, I said, I'm telling you, because if you think about it, Honeywell runs a second and third shift. Chewy runs a second, third shift, and that parking lot is full all the time. If Newly's going to have second shifts at least, and maybe third shifts, you're going to have a significant portion of those people that, well, when the rest of us are asleep, they need something to eat, either before or after their shift or on their break. And so there's going to be a market for that, and I think that's increasing, even though the vast majority of our citizens and us don't see that. It is out there, and there is a demand for it. So I think that will shape some of the retail restaurant development, especially the fast food side, going forward from here. It's an increasing market, certainly. So just FYI on that one.
I guess you're right. When you think about the tenants in Belton there, in Commerce Center, there are a lot of second and third shift businesses. So you didn't have that 5 years ago when those were a golf course and an undeveloped piece of property.
Anyone else? Okay, David, thank you very much. Great report, like I said. We don't have anything else on our agenda tonight. Is there anything else anybody'd like to bring forward? If there's nothing, we'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.